Welcome to Small Arm Solutions. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on building a clone M16A1. As previously in the first video, you'd seen where we went over all of the retro parts manufactured by Brownells, so we can build accurate versions of the earlier M16A1s. First video, we went over all of the components, what they were, and introduced some of the Brownells components. Here in part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to do the assembly of the lower receiver. And then in part 3, we're going to do the assembly of the upper receiver, completion of the rifle, and then we're going to do a little bit of a range test on it. The only part that I've pre-installed on this lower receiver is the trigger guard, due to the fact that this table that I'm working on is plastic, and it wouldn't have done too well, with it bouncing all over the place and my tools will be everywhere, so I did that. I do want to mention one thing specifically about this process. When you are installing the pin for the trigger guard, the ear must be supported. If you do not, you have a very good chance of breaking these ears off. When I was at Colt, even working with Lewis Machine and Tool, one of the biggest problems that happened was you'd have lower receivers coming back with these broken off where people were installing or reinstalling different trigger guards on there, and this was not supported. These have to be supported when you install these, or you will break these ears off. So that's something that's very, very important when you're working with trigger guards. This is not necessarily the strongest part of the lower receiver. When I train people how to do work on M16 M4 type series rifles, I always have a method to my madness. What I like to do is I like to go from the front rearward. Now, is that the only way to do this? No, you can do it any way that you want. But for me, I like doing everything in order. Now, this is the order when I write my manuals. This is the order that I go in the manuals as well. So the first part we're going to install is the front pivot pin. Now, this is the one that people really, really don't like doing. And in my armor schools, this is the worst because I have to replace dozens of detent pins and springs because they fly across the room, because this is a little bit of a technique to doing this. There's a tool that you use. This is a Brownells tool. This is a front pivot installation tool. You see there's a hole in the end. As you go into the receiver, you'll see that that hole will line up with the hole in the right side of the receiver. We're going to take our detent spring, slide it into place. Then the detent itself we're going to put in there. Then we're going to take a roll pin punch and we're going to push all that in. And then we're going to rotate it so it's held captive. As you can see, you may be able to see the detent in there, it's held captive. Now is the tricky part. You have your pivot pin, you have the slot here, you want that facing forward. You're going to hold that up against the tool, and as you slide that into place, you want to make sure that that holds that detent in. And now we're going to rotate till we hear that click. Now we're going to do a safety check or a function check to make sure it holds it open and it holds it closed. So there we go. Next part is going to be the magazine release. We drop the magazine release in from the side, like so. Rotate, insert the spring over. Now when we do the button, we want to make sure that the knurling is facing up. And we're going to start that like so. And we're going to rotate that until it goes into the stop notch. Now, I'm going to show you a different tool that I'm very fond of. This is available on Brownells also. It's I believe this is made by Norgon. You see you have the shape of the magazine release button, and you have a little bit of the dimple in there to go in the center. We're going to push that in like so. Push that all the way in. And now we're going to rotate the latch until we feel a little bit of pressure. And that's about where we want that. We want that so it's flush. The screw is flush with the spring. I'm going to go one more rotation on that. So now everything is flush. Push, everything's working like so. Next is going to be the bolt catch. So what I like to do also is just to make things go easier, I'll have everything set out on my bench. So we have the bolt catch, plunger, and spring. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to insert the spring, like so. then the plunger, and now we have the bolt catch itself. Now you will see that I have a roll pin holder, the 3S. Anybody who's working on these rifles, these roll pin holders are essential because, as you see, I have these gigantic man paws here, and I would not be able to hold this in place. So put this in like so. Now I'm going to take a piece of plastic, or I'm going to take some kind of a piece of tape. I'm going to put it over this because I don't want to scratch the receiver. So I'm just going to give this a couple taps just to start it. Move that. Now I'm going to take the bolt catch. I'm going to install that like so. Now what I want to do is I want to have that held in place so it's aligned. So I'm going to use that pin right there. Now there's a special bolt catch pin, roll pin punch. As you can see, there's a flat on the side. It says Brownells on here. This is under Brownells tool. That flat goes on like so. I'm going to tap that all the way in. Till it's just flush. And we ensure we have proper function of the bolt catch. So now we've done the front pivot pin, we've done the bolt catch, and the magazine release. Next is going to be the installation of the trigger mechanism. And we have all these components right here. First thing we have to do is insert your disconnector spring. And you'll see that sort of a cone shaped. You have a larger end at the bottom. That's to go into the rear pocket. As you see, there's a round cutout pocket. All the way in. Now, one of the things I want to mention about disconnector springs, especially if you're building a 9mm, you want to make sure you have a good heavy spring, because if you don't, due to the higher rate of fire of the blowback, you get these things to go full auto on you, and you don't want that. So you want to make sure you have a good heavy spring. The springs I normally use are the Colt springs. They're black. They're extremely heavy, but this is the one that came with the Bushmaster kit. The next thing is the installation of the spring itself. You sort of look at that as a sled. We move forward, and now we lift up. Now we notice how this is underneath here. That's where that has to be. Now I want to also explain to you a little bit how these lock into place, because people do ask all the time about how these springs, do we need anti-lock pins and whatnot. I'm going to show you how this all works. When you insert the hammer and trigger pin, you'll see that there's a notch on one of the sides right here. When the hammer is installed, that latch, the part of the spring, that locks in place on there. And when that locks in place in there, that locks that pin's ability to be able to move. So if this is installed correctly, your pins will not walk. So this is how the trigger pin is held in place. The hammer is held in differently. You'll notice that you have a pin right here, which is referred to as the J pin. And you'll see that that's crimped like so. But when you look, you probably won't be able to see. But when you see through here, you'll see that there is that pin goes right across. And when you look at your pin, you have a notch right in the center here. That's what goes across and it clicks into place. That's what holds the hammer pin in place, so the hammer pin will not walk. So as long as this is installed correctly, you will never have issues with a hammer and trigger pin. I'm going to show you an easy way to install the trigger assembly. You drop the disconnector in, and we're going to use a slave pin. These pins are usually made of just taking a hammer trigger pin and cutting it down so it aligns properly. So we're going to take that, so that's going to center. We're going to drop the trigger into place. We're going to align the slave pin. Then we're just going to push all the way through. And now we have the trigger installed. Make sure we have free movement. Now we have to do some things in order here. We cannot put the trigger in, because if we put the trigger in, we're not going to be able to put the safety in. So now we're going to put the safety in. We drop it from the side. Now I like to put a little bit of lubricant into this area where the detent is. So I use the TW25. And I'm going to drop that right on the detent itself. We're going to drop the detent with the tip first into the slot on the receiver. Now what we're going to do is we're going to insert our safety detent spring into the pistol grip. Now I want to make a note on this detent spring. This is the exact same spring as used in the ejector. They're two common parts. So the same spring that's being used for the safety detent is the same one used in the ejector. Like so. Now we're going to take pistol grip screw and lock washer. Now some of these will have a hex, some of them will have a straight blade screwdriver. Insert through, like so. You'll see here where you have the detent pin. Now we're going to slide the pistol grip on. So that goes right over it. Push inward. There is actually a specification for, I think it's like 60 inch-pounds or so for this screw, but hand tight is normal. So hand tight. Make sure now our safety works. Now sometimes when you install these, it may be stiff at first. That just means you got some burrs that gotta work their way out. So we're good to go now. We're gonna put the safety off on the semi. If you have it on safe, you're not going to be able to insert your hammer. So now we're going to take our hammer, and you notice these two legs, they have to be like so. Once we get this assembled, we'll take a closer look at it. You normally should not have to use a hammer on this, but unfortunately when you have some very thick anodizing such as this is, it may be necessary. Now I want you to notice the way that these legs are installed. They're on the edge. They're on the outside of the spring on the trigger. This is the way that it has to be. Hammer and trigger pins will not walk out. So we'll do a function check. Now with safety engaged, we're good to go. The next part we're going to install is going to be the buffer spring and buffer retainer spring. So you notice that we have the buffer retainer and buffer retainer spring. Drop into the slot into the receiver. Push down. Now we're going to take our receiver extension. Make sure that is in place. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this over to the vise and we're going to torque this down to its proper specifications. Now we're going to torque the receiver extension. Now the receiver extension goes from 30 to 40 foot-pounds. I had this set for 35. That's all there is to it. We've torqued this down. We're now going to insert the rear takedown pin in the rear. We're going to drop the detent into the hole in the side. Now we're going to add the spring. Now we're going to slide the stock over. And we want to make sure that we compress this evenly so it does not bind. Like so. Got to make sure that's straight. Going to insert the screw. Now we're going to tighten the buttstock screw. You need to make sure that you use the right one because this is a A1 length stock. The A2 requires a longer one. It also requires a spacer, so that we're not going to be using with the A1. So now we have our stock installed. Now we're just going to insert our buffer spring. Now we have a completed lower receiver, all retro M16A1. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment. I'll try and get back to you. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share. And we'll see you for part 3, the assembly of the upper receiver.